Akala mo hindi masakit yung pinagsasabi mo sa akin? Napatay gutom ako? Bakit? Hindi ba yun masasakit? Eh, ikaw nga sobra-sobra kinukuha mo sa tusok-tusok eh. 5 lang bayad mo, tapos 10 kinuha mo. Sana yun oh. Siya yun, siya pagsabihan mo, siya paninisi, hati na nga kami sa pagkain, di naman siya bumili, hindi na niya lang hingiin. Oh, wag mo na siya anuhin, wag mo na siya anuhin. Bakit ka nakikisali dito, hindi ka naman kasali? O bakit? Bakit mo inaano? Pinsan ko, umiiyak na nga, di ba? Tapos yun na nga, wag mo na anuhin, umiiyak na nga, di ba? O bakit? O bakit din? Balis ka dito. Ayos ako, di naman ako dito eh. Manunood na lang akong Dota sa bahay.
Uy, 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 tigil niyo yan. Ingay-ingay niyo Manulad na lang kayo ng presentation namin. A pleasant day, 12 ABM C84, our fellow classmates, and most importantly to our 21st century literature of the Philippines and the world subject teacher, Miss Eveth Hernandez. Today, my group and I will be discussing to you our 21st century literature from the Philippines and the world performance task. But before everything else, I would like to introduce myself. Good day, my name is Russell De Valenzuela from group number 1, and together with my group mates,
Irish Cristalpi Artiaga.
Ebron Natalie B.
Lorenzana Kim Ariesa L.
Pancha Jane M.
Robledo Arabella.
Siligbon Shairin T.
Tapia Amanda Claire I.
Already Rivera Q.
Tubale Maria Cristina R.
And Valencia Louis Grazel DG.
will be your presenters for today. In our presentation for today, the group will discuss the author's biography, literary work, description, and the literary analysis for the chosen literary work of the authors from the region NCR, Region 1, and Region 2 of the Philippines. For the presentation overview, the group will be tackling about the National Capital Region's Michael M Carosa and his poem entitled Putol. Francisco Chenio Jose's work, The God Stealer from Region 1, Ilocos Region, and the Rural Maid poem by Fernando M. Maramag Jr. from the Cagayan Valley Region 2. To begin with, let's go first defining the National Capital Region. The National Capital Region, often known as Metropolitan Manila or Metro Manila, locally called as Kalakhayang Maynila, is the Philippine seat of government and one of the three defined metropolitan areas in the Philippines. NCR consists of 16 cities, namely the city of Manila, Quezon City, Caloocan, Las Piñas, Makati, Malabon, Mandaluyong, Marikina, Muntinlupa, Navotas, Parañaque, Pasay, San Juan, Taguig, and lastly is my surname, Valenzuela. It is the center of culture, economy, education, and government in the Philippines. Designed as the global power city, NCR or National Capital Region exerts a significant influence on the commerce, finance, media, arts, fashion, research, technology, education, entertainment, and especially to the Philippine literature both locally and internationally. One of National Capital Region's mostly renowned literary authors is Michael M. Carosa from Ermita, Manila. And to elucidate us with his life biography and contribution to the Philippine literature, Here is Louis Grizel Valencia.
Good day po sa lahat. I am Louis Grezel Valencia. Andito po ako to present the bibliography of the manunulat that we chose galing sa NCR. His name is Michael M Carosa. His nickname is Mike. Born on August 26, 1969. He is now 52 years old. Born at Ermita, Manila. Parents, Marshal Zarilla Carosa and Salud Yuriza Modina. Wife, Jeanette M. Jobs, with 3 children. Currently lives at Nangkama, Marikina City since 2005. Next. He finished his elementary at Parang Elementary School in 1982, secondary at Marikina Institute of Science and Technology 1986, and studied colleges in universities with the degree at University of Santo Tomas 1990 with the degree of Bachelor of Arts, major in Philosophy, Ateneo de Manila University 2001, with the degree of Master of Arts in Filipino Literature, and University of the Philippines Diliman 2010 with the degree of Doctor of Philosophy Filipino. Next. Occupation is an associate professor at the Department of Filipino School of Humanities, Ateneo de Manila University, handling graduate and undergraduate courses in Filipino literature, history, and criticism, creative writing, poetry in Filipino, literary translation, theory and practice, and language studies. Next. The brief history of the author's life. Multi-awarded poet, essayist, translator, editor, and educator. He is also singer, has received recognition within and outside the country. He is famous from promoting the traditional poetic genre of the Philippines, balagpasan. He has a column in a literary magazine, Heraya, Imagination, and Liwayway, Dawn. He participated in the International Poetry Readings, Kuala Lumpur 10 in 2004, and the second Literary Festival, Korea Asian in Jakarta in 2011. Next. The literary works of Michael Carosa. Dilit Dilim 1997, Mga Lagot na Liwanag in 2001, Invisible Man ang Tatay in 2009, Ang Mga Kahon ni Kalon in 2010, Ang Mga Lambing ni Lolo Ding in 2012, Nawawala si Muningning 2015, Munting Daigdig ng Dalit at Awit, Si Nanay, si Lolo Seferino, at Lira, at si Elliot, at ang Genesis ng aking pananaludtod. Ang Mabuhay Singers at Ako sa Pag-awit at Pag-ibig, Asiano and Anthology of Poems from Southeast Asia 1995, Anthology Puisi de Kemanasuyaan 2004, The Asia Right Anthology of Asian Short Stories and Poems in 2008. Next, Michael Carosa's achievements. Don Carlos Literary Award 1991 to 2009 with 8 times. Francisco Balagtas Prize by the Committee of the Philippines Literature in 2005. Award of Honor and Ani ng Dangal by the National Committee for Creature and Arts in 2009. Rev. Horacio de la Costa Prize by Ateneo de Manila University in 2012. Southeast Asian Writers or CEA Right Award from the Royalty of Thailand in 2007. He has the Secretary General of Union ng mga Manunulat sa Pilipinas or UMPIL, UMPIL, and the OIC President of the Philippines Institute of Translation. He was also admitted as an associate of the NIDA School for Translation Studies in 2014, held at the Fondazione Universitaria San Pellegrino in Misano, Adriocto, Italy. Next, to discuss the work description to be presented by Miss Archaga. Thank you.
Mabuhay! Isang mapagpalang tanghali sa inyo, Binibining Hernandez at mga kamag-aral. Once again, I'm Aisha P. Artiaga, and we're going to talk about work description as Miss Valencia has already introduced Michael M. Carosa. But before I go into the piece with Vic, let's talk about how he got into writing and performing poetry in the first place. Since he was a child, Michael M. Carosa has been delivering poems. He was inspired to give poem after hearing those people perform their poetry on the radio. In addition, he stated that his mother enjoys delivering poems. When he entered kindergarten, his teacher noticed his ability to perform a poem for the first time. He would usually perform a poem that other people had written in school contests for kindergarten to high school, until he realized why he was only reading other people's poem. After that, he penned his own poem and recited once at the barangay event. But by the time he arrived at the college, he had decided that poetry was not for him. However, during his second year of college, one of his classmates indicated interest in entering the University of Santo Tomas Varsitarian. He convinced him to take the test, and luckily, both he and his best friend passed. As a result, his passion to write reversed at that time. While he was a varsitarian, he practiced and enhanced his skill to create and present poems. One of his pieces of advice is not to stop looking for things since we might be at the top or have just find our niche if we do. Now let's go on to his writing style. Michael Amkoraza uses a descriptive style in most of his writing. He describes reality, and whether describing a place, a person, or an object, he always contains multiple details to ensure that the reader has a clear and complete grasp of particular topic. He describes an event, an item, or a thing rather than merely relaying facts on a previous occurring onset, which is poetry. To extend the concepts, he employs rich vocabulary, a distinct style, and distinct rhythm so that the readers will think about what he is trying to say or what message he was trying to convey through his work. He was able to exhilarate a response from his audience using this method. And if we understand what he is trying to convey, it will be permanently engaged in our mind and we will have delivered it. His works are full of truths, and like his poetry, Popol, they will awaken you to reality and reveal how the words work. Now, let's move forward to our chosen work, Putol, now that we've finished with Michael M. Carosa's writing style. One of the most well-known Filipino poets whose essay and children's story have won numerous literary awards, Michael M. Carosa is a fervent supporter of Filipino poetry. One of his winning works is the poem Putol. He received an honorable mention in the Don Carlos Palanca Memorial Award for Literature in 1991. What drove Michael M. Carosa to compose this poem? He created this for the purpose of poverty. One aspect of poverty is that many people lack prospect or job, so they indulge in the bad activities such as material bulgery, as well as selling of body organs and drugs, as these are their only method of feeding their family. Poetry by Michael M. Kurazapopol is a poem about poor people in the Philippines, and it takes the poem location into consideration. As a result of poverty, Filipinos' practicality and selfishness are highlighted in this poetry. Instead of feeling guilty or depressed about what he saw, which was a pile of garbage, he pitied the shoe he couldn't no longer to wear. Now, let's move on to the literary analysis. Miss Kim Ariza Lorenzana, the floor is yours.
Hello, what's up everyone? Again, may nalagnap is Kim Arya sa El Lorenzana, and I'll be talking about Michael M. Carosa's literary work, specifically a poem titled Tolpo, Putol, by Michael M. Carosa. May kanang paang putol sa tambakan ng basura, nakanay. Dinampot ng basurero kung matas ang dugo. Umiling-iling ang basurero't pumulong, sayang wala na namang kapares. In his poem Putol, Michael Carosa intends to express to us that the poem is about people's practicality and selfishness as a result of poverty. As a result, their own desire take precedence over their care for others. Rather than being saddened by what he saw, he bemoaned the shoe he couldn't wear. This implies that we should not be self-centered in our lives, but rather concentrate on the most important part. Rather than looking at the larger picture, we concentrate slowly on what consumers want now that they have them. They are significant to us since some of us do not have the financial means to purchase them. That is exactly what is happening in the Philippines right now. In order to solve broader concerns and prevent poverty, the Philippine government can do better than wasting money on non-essentials. They have the ability to give us with better education so that such devastation does not occur. He shows that materialism is the fundamental source of ignorance. Furthermore, rather than desiring something greater, we should be grateful for and embrace the small things in our lives. Let us now discuss the literary analysis of Putol. As we have read, the poem is written in free verse, whereas the syllabic structure and rhyming pattern are not applicable, since the poem itself is a free verse. Because Michael Carosa employs literal words and terminology, metaphorical language is not applicable. Let us discuss and analyze the poem per stanza. The first stanza, may kanang paang putol, sa tambakan ng basura nakanay. As we read, the first stanza depicts violence. The literal interpretation of the right leg that was just tossed in the rubbish dump is already proof of the brutality that is occurring in our society. It is undeniable that is happening today because if we focus on the news, we hear that it is more than simply cutting food on the continuous massacre today. The second stanza, dinampot ng basurero, kumatas ang dugo. This text contains depictions of violence. The blood represents the owner's agony and pain. The loss and waste of life can be inferred from its leakage at the same time. In today's world, bloodshed is frequently the outcome of evil-motivated violence. And lastly, the third stanza, umiling-iling ang basurero't pumulong, sayang wala na namang kapares. This section of the poem is characterized by disillusionment and regret. Failure in the world is defined as failing to achieve the intended results. Regret the loss of optimism that may have been seen. In today's poverty, there is always the disappointment and sorrow of many things that we have not achieved, whether material or non-material. In the real world, situations like this happen to all of us. It also displays a lack of concern for others. People are more concerned about their own needs and interests than the circumstances. It is a fact because it is happening right now. The theme. The poem's theme demonstrates realism, including poverty, chaos, a lack of justice, violence, people's selfishness, and Filipino ignorance. The viewpoint, as we read the poem, we can conclude that the author used a third-person point of view. Lastly, the symbolism. Paang putol represents the country turmoil as a result of poverty. Kanang paang putol, it demonstrates a lack of justice. The knight is a sign of how materialistic people are. Lastly, basurero is an emblem of the country's poverty. Now that we are tapos na sa Casdis Ana ni Michael M. Carosa's biography and analyzing his work, arat na sa Region 1, back to you, Russell.
Maraming matsala, or should I say, thank you, Miss Valencia, Miss Archaga, and Miss Lorenzana. And that would be all for the author's biography, literary work, description, and literary analysis for the National Capital Region's Michael M. Carosa and his poem entitled Putol. Now, for our next region, the Ilocos region or Region 1. The Ilocos region is located in the northwestern region of the Luzon, bounded by the Cordillera Administrative Region and Cagayan Valley or Region 2. To the east, central Luzon to the south, and west Philippine Sea by the west. Ilocos region is composed of four provinces, namely Ilocos Sur, Ilocos Norte, La Union, and Pangasinan. Although southern portion's economy is anchored on agri-industrial and service industries, such as milk, fish, rice, tobacco, corn, sugarcane, and fruit cultivation and processing, livestock raising, fish paste processing, and others, its trading, financial services, and educational services cannot be denied. Actually, Ilocos region is one of the most rich and culturally diverse Philippine literatures in the Philippines. A known literary author from the Ilocos region is Francisco Chenil Jose. He is born in Rosales, Pangasinan, and to present us the literary progress and life of Mr. Francisco Chenil Jose, let's give the floor to Miss Natalie Ebron.
Naimbag nga daw everyone. My name is Natalie Abron, one of the presenter of Region 1. And since we already talked about the chosen author of NCR, let's move on now to the author of Region 1. So, who is the author Francisco Chenil Jose? According to my research, Jose's full name is Francisco Frankie Chenil Jose, and his pen name is F. Chenil Jose. He was born in Rosales, Pangasinan on December 3, 1924, and he is currently now 96 years old. He spent his childhood in their place in Barrio Cabuyao, Rosales, where he began to write. Jose is a Filipino whose family migrated to Pangasinan prior to his birth. And for his education, Jose attended the University of Santo Tomas after the World War II, but dropped out and plunged into writing and journalizing in Manila. Next. Next slide po. Also, Jose was married to his wife Maria Teresa Jovellanos Jose, and their family consists of 7 children, 11 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren. And for his occupation, in subsequent years, he edited various literary and journalistic publications. He also started a publishing house and founded the Philippine branch of PEN, an international organization for writers. To elaborate his work, Jose becomes staff member in Commonwealth Manila in 1947, assistant editor in United States Information Agency U.S. Embassy Manila in 1948, and associate editor and managing editor in Manila Times Sunday Magazine in 1949, editor and in Comment Quarterly Manila in 1956, editor of Manila Times Annual Progress, and founder and national secretary of PEN Philippine Center in 1958, and managing editor of Asia Magazine in Hong Kong, information officer in Colombo Plan Headquarters, Ceylon, and lecturer in the Arellano University in 1962. And also, he also correspondent, economist in London, publisher Solidaridad Publishing House, and general manager in Solidaridad Bookshop in 1965. Also, he, he is a publisher and editor in Solidarity Magazine in 1966, manager in Solidaridad Galleries in All Manila in 1967, lecturer in University of East Graduate School in 1968, and lecturer in De La Salle University in 1984, writer in residence, National University of Singapore in 1987, and visiting research scholar, Center of Southeast Asian Study, Kyoto University, Japan. And now, in his 90s, he continued to be a prolific writer and relentless voice against social injustice and national amnesia. In fact, almost daily, he still climbs the steps to his writing alcove on the third floor of Solidaridad Bookshop. So, after discussing his occupation, let's move on to the brief history of Francisco Chanel Jose. So, once again, Jose was born in Rosales, Pangasinan, which also served as the location for several of his novels. He grew up in Rosales Barrio Cabogawan, where he first began to write. Jose was of Ilocano origin and his family had moved to Pangasinan before he was born. And according to his some interview, one of Jose's most influential people was his hardworking mother, who went out of her way to acquire him the book that he wanted to read, while also ensuring that their family did not go hungry despite poverty and landlessness. Jose began writing about the time he began reading elementary school because one of Jose's teacher opened the school library to a student in fifth grade, which is how he was able to read works by Jose Rizal, Villa Caters, May Antonia, Faulkner, and Steinbeck. Since Jose started reading the works of Jose Rizal, the young Jose cried when he read about Basilio and Crispin in Rizal's Noli Me Tangere, for injustice was not new to him. Because when Jose was 5 years old, his grandpa, a soldier during the Philippine Revolution, had tearfully shown him the property his family had previously tilled but had been taken away by wealthy mestizo landowners who understand how to game the system against illiterates like his grandfather. In addition, Jonel Jose is the proprietor of Solidaridad Bookshop, which he and his wife established in 1995 on Padre Faura Street in Ermita, Manila. And this this bookshop specializes on hard-to-find titles and Filipiniana reading materials, and it is reported to be popular for local writers. So, for his advocacies, we all know that Francisco Chanel Jose is a well-known novelist in the Philippines. And throughout his career, he was writing to first highlight the social underpinnings, class struggles, and colonial history of Filipino society. Also, he was right to advocate for social justice and change in order to improve the lives of ordinary Filipino families. But ultimately, it is the consistent espousal of the aspiration of Filipino for the national sovereignty and social justice that guarantees of his work. So now, after discussing the advocacies, let's move on now to his literary work. So for his novella, Jose have three Filipino women in 1992 and two Filipino women in 1991. Also, for Rosales Saga novels, which is a five-novel series that spans 3 centuries of Philippine history translated into 22 languages. It consists of Poon in 1984, The Pretenders in 1962, and My Brother, My Executor in 1973, and Mass in December 31, 1974. And for his other novels, Jose have Don Vicente in 1980, The Samson, which is The Pretenders and Mass combined in one book, and Gagambal, which is The Spider-Man in 1991, and Viajero in 1993, and Sin in 1994, and Ben Singcol in 2001, Ermita in 1988, and Rivera in 2007, and Church in 2008. And for his short story collection, Jose have The Godzilla and the Other Stories in 2001, Puppy Love and 13 Short Story in March 15, 1998, and All Vision and Other Story in 1988, Platinum 10 Filipino Stories in 1983, Waywaya or 11 Filipino Short Story in 1980, and Asian Pen Anthology in 1966. And for his children books, he has The Molave and the Orchid in November 2004. And for his verses, he has Question in 1988. And for essay and nonfiction, Jose have in Research of the Word in March 15, 1998, and We Filipinos Are Moral, Malay, Our Heroic Heritage. Also, Jose have Sova, Servel, and Shibuya, a member of post-war Japan. Heroes in Atlic, Termites in the Sala, Why We Are Poor, and This I Believe. And for translation, he also translate his work, The Pretenders in Sisek language in Skobovda, and Poon in Tagalog language, and Litera in Spanish language and Rivera on October 2003. And in anthologies, he Jose Habtong. And in film documentaries, Jose have A Filipino Odyssey by Art Makoshinsky. So, after discussing his literary works, let's go for the achievement that Jose Francisco Chanel received for his work. So first, five of Jose's work have won the Carlos Palanca Memorial Awards for Literature. It consists of The God Stealer in 1959, Waywaya in 1979, Arbol de Fuego or Fire Tree in 1980, Mass in 1981, and A Scenario for Philippine Resistance in 1979. And for the following year, he was given U.S. Department of State Smith Grant in 1955, Asia Foundation Grant in 1960, National Press Club Award for Journalism three times in 1967, SPAC Fellowship in 1971, Rockefeller Foundation Pelagio Award in 1979, City of Manila Award to Literature in 1979, and prestigious Ramon Magsaysay Award for Journalism, Literature, and Creative Communication Art. Also, he received Palanca Awards for Journalism three times in 1981, East West Center Fellowship in 1981, an International House of Jawan Fellowship in 1963, and Outstanding Publisher Awards for Literature in 1988, and Cultural Center of the Philippines Award or Gawad para sa Sining for Literature in 1989. By, and it not And by the turn of the century, Jose continued to receive recognition for several award-giving bodies and consists of Cultural Center of the Philippines Centennial Award in 1999, the prestigious Chevalier in 2000, and the Order of Sacred Treasure in 2001, and National Artist for Literature, Officer in the French Order of Arts and Letters. And lastly, in 2004, Jose was garnered the covered Pablo Neruda Centennial Award in Chile. So, before I end the biography of Francisco Chanel Jose, here are few of the famous quotes of Francisco Chanel that some of us may be familiar with. So first, we write from life and call it literature, and literature lives because we are in it. Second, time will come that all that we love, we will eventually lose, and all that we hate, we will eventually face. And third, just because you have so much to give does not mean that they'll all be accepted. There's more to giving than just giving. And fourth, we cannot be rooted in the past forever. We must not be sentimental. And lastly, to those who want to leave this nation from the dance strip of history, the past does not matter. Only the present, the awareness of deadening wrath which surround and suffocate us, and what we must do to banish it. So that concludes the Francisco Chanel biography. Once again, I'm Natalie Abron presenting the author's biography of Region 1. So, back to you, Russell Dave.
Thank you for the well-explained discussion, Ms. Ebron. It was very evident that Francisco Chino Jose provided a vast literary contributions and achievements to the Philippine literature and the world. Now, to discuss a description of the Francisco Chino Jose's literary works, here is Ms. Shireen Saligbon.
Thank you, Mr. Russell de Valenzuela. Naimbag nga malem classmates, Ma'am Hernandez. I'm Sharon T. Selegbon, and now let's talk about the literary work or the work description of the author story we picked, Francisco Chanel Jose the God Stealer. Perhaps you've already heard the name Francisco Chanel Jose in some of his works when you were a child. Do you know that he faced rejections before achieving his current status? In an exclusive interview with the Philippine news agency, Jose, 92, revealed that when he initially started out, editors of newspapers rejected him multiple times. He emphasizes that writing as an art and not just an occupation is a lifelong practice, and as you attempt to improve, you compete with yourself. Jose stated that through creative writing, one might create alternate ideas and possibilities. He just kept learning, writing, and reading since the writing is a process of discovery for him. He highlighted that imagination, creativity, and uniqueness are not things that can be taught. That is why he was opposed to workshop writing classes and PhDs. When asked for 5 tips on how to write more successfully, Jose merely said, "What do you intend to do? What are you trying to convey? Do you want to terrify your readers?" Jose chronicles the history of the Philippines while also telling the stories of generations of Samsons whose personal lives are intertwined with the country's social challenges. His writing, especially his many stories, have been published and translated into a variety of languages due to universal appeal. F. Chanel Jose transcends his ego and he thinks that he is part of a greater community. Because was influenced by our national hero, Jose, he remarked that it is not your obligation to live and write in the manner of Rizal. We only need to write about the society we are familiar with. We can only do this if we know ourselves and are deeply anchored in our country. And due to Jose's writing style, the injustice and issues on our country's legacy, he started to write the Godzilla in around 1950s. Next slide po. This narrative was first published as a short story in 1959, then as a collection in 1968, named The Godzilla and Other Stories by R.P. Garcia Publishing Corporation in Quezon City, and again in 1983 in Bratislava, Slovakia. This was F. Chanel's Jose's most extensively anthologized piece of fiction. This is not only a story about an Ifugao stealing a religious god, but also about a friendship that grew between a Filipino and American, a depiction of the relationship between the influence and the influencer. Since the character of the god stealer, Philip, was taken from the word Philippines and Sam that was taken from Uncle Sam, a representative of the United States. His story, The God Stealer, won first prize in the 1959 Carlos Palanca Memorial Awards for short story in the Philippines. In this story, he has already defined his literary geography, delves into the depths of the Filipino character while adhering the overarching topic of practically all of his work. The Filipino often hopeless struggle for social justice and moral order. This story was allegedly translated into 27 languages, including Tagalog. The God Stealer is a short story that brilliantly captures how fictional characters react to the choices they have made and what they do to achieve this decision. This story is about the two co-workers named Sam Christie and Philip Latak. Philip, often known as E-Pig, is an Ifugao convert to Christianity who now lives in Manila. Philip's cultural identity, beliefs, and practices grew less emotive when he moved to the city. Sam Christie, on the other hand, was an American who wanted to see the Ifugao rise terraces. He was also interested in buying an original Ifugao god figurine, and due to Sam wanting to have this figurine and saying that he wouldn't leave until he got souvenir of Ifugao gods. Philip assured Sam that he would take a deity for him because he was the one responsible why the vacation and race happened. After the feast, Philip Latak returned to the boarding house after midnight with his grandfather's statue, which he handed over to Sam Christie. They pondered whether was better for Philip to return the blood-stained god to his grandfather. It was already daylight when Sam Christie awoke. Philip Latak had roused him. His voice was loud and unpleasant. Sam learned from him that his grandfather was dying. The next day, Sadek informed Sam that their grandparent had died and that Philip would not accompany Sam to Manila, explaining that he was the reason his grandfather was no longer alive. Their friendship was shattered from that point forward. Philip Latak never once looked Sam in the eyes. He showed up to be truly absorbed in his work. And Sam realized at this point that Philip was determined to stay and break his ties with Sam. Philip's robbery represented the Filipinos' abandonment by their tribal origins and traditions, only to be supplanted by a natural society brought about by colonization. Throughout history, colonialism has left Filipinos in a condition of bewilderment, unsettled emotions, powerlessness, pain, embarrassment, and an ability to appreciate the past. This aim establishes the story line for the short story, in which you see how well rounded the protagonist is and what he or she is willing to do merely to attain what he wants. The character may triumph or fail depending on the outcome of the tale, and how the character reacts to these challenges also establishes the tone for the climax till the short story is ended. And again, I'm Sharon T. Sinigbon, and that's all po. Thank you. Back to you po, Mr. Russell de Valenzuela.
Thank you, Ms. Saligbon. Afterwards, tackling the God Stealer's literary analysis, let's give a warm welcome to Miss Amanda Claire I. Tapia.
Hi, masantos yung araw, pod si Kayon Amin. I'm Amanda Claire I. Tapia. Since the author's biography and work description are already discussed, now here is the literary analysis of Francisco Sionil Jose, the God Stealer. First is the character. Philip Latak was a 26 years old native Ifugao man known as Eveth, who had lost connection with his previous culture and Sam Christie's assistant and best friend. He lived in Manila for a few years, so he wasn't familiar with his hometown or culture. The second is Sam Christie. was a 28 years old American guy who came to see the rice terraces in the province. He and Philip was a great friend. The person who willing to buy an ancient sculpture of an Ifugao god who possessed Philip and pressured him to do things that were against their tradition. Third is Sadek, the Philip's older brother who worked as a rice terraces farmer, rejected rejected Philip's idea to leave them in favor for a life far from their own culture and lifestyle. He stated that when Philip lived and worked in Manila, he might forget where he was born and what ethnic origin he had. And number four is Philip's granddad, was a proud owner of the precious figurine. Despite Philip's abandonment, he welcomed Steve Pig with the happiness and planned a celebration for him, and he died unfortunately after realizing that that his god had been taken. And the next one is the setting, place. Manila, Baguio, Rice Terraces Boarding House, and South Pacific. First, let's discuss the Manila. This is where Sam stayed and Philip is currently working and living. The location of the agency. Baguio, this is where the Rice Terraces and Mountain Province are located. Third is the rice terraces. This is the precise place in Baguio where they live and frequently cultivate their crops. Boarding house. It consists of four red roofed structure and is located near the mountain province village where Sam and Philip temporarily resided. In South Pacific, the place where the samurai sword had a history and time. It is around December when Sam Christie and Philip Latak went to Baguio. And now, let's proceed to plot. The exposition. The story begins in the early morning of December. Sam Christie and his native assistant, Philip Latak, were on the way to Baguio City, where Philip and Ifugao's hometown. It was also Sam Christie's last month in the country, and he would be returning to Boston to use his long-awaited leave. The fact that they are traveling because Sam wants that the ancient Ifugao's God before it even happens that Philip works in Manila. His grandfather's wish is to stay in exchange for a portion of the rice terraces, but against his wish, Philip still decided to live in the city. Next po, action. Philip, now considering himself as a city boy that is far from the tribal culture he had back then. At first, he had no intention of returning to the mountain province, but due to Sam Christie, he is convinced to come back. He also had no conscience, made disparaging remarks about the Ifugaos and the region from which he hails. Despite the region from which he hails, his mentality, attitude, and decision 4 years ago, his, his grandfather is delighted to see him and made a plan for a large celebration on his behalf. The climax. In the celebration that has been planned, Philip and Sam had a small talk about some collection of the valuable stuff from the different countries, until their conversation ended up with the Ifugao god that Sam was particularly interested. And since no one is interested to sell the Ifugao ancient god figurine, they got to the point that Philip had the dangerous suggestion of stealing his grandfather's deity. But this is exactly what happens, and she do it, and he do it without any hesitation. He considered it as a meaningful definition of thanking Sam for his promotion at work. But suddenly, his grandfather noticed that his has vanished and he dies as a result of his grandson stealing it. And the following action. Sam could not believe the reason for the death of Philip's grandfather, and he insisted that by excessive drinking and not by the loss of Ifugaw's God. Sam was searching for Philip out of his curiosity. Then, when Philip admits his guilt and explains why he chose to remain in the mountains, it is because he regrets his action towards his grandfather, and instead of loving it, he commits even more betrayal. All this time, his grandfather was well aware from the start that he was the one who had stolen the gun. And now, let's proceed to the resolution. Sam and Philip's friendship ended up as a result of what happened. Lastly, Sam Christie recognized the true identity and origin of Philip Latak as a magnificent Ifugao dressed in a simple attire of the indigenous people, and not the Philip Latak he saw in Manila. He doesn't even notice some he doesn't even notice some since he too preoccupied shedding the wooden block again. He creating a new god to take the place of a previous one's, the god who was taken from his grandfather. And now, let's proceed to the theme. Francisco Sional Jose, the God Stealer, is an exploration of the war of aggression and colonial impacts as seen through the lasting legacy of the American conquest on the Filipinos. It's also about the kinship that forms between a Filipino and American, similar to the connection that exists between colonized and colonizer. Additionally, presented to the culture of our ancestors that gradually eliminated, affected by the proliferation of the international and modernized culture. This narrative showed the distinct Philippine culture and history portrayed in the religious ceremony and ritual rites of the Ifogaos. Next is the moral. The story let us appreciate our family whatever the circumstances. It demonstrates how important it is for us to respect and cherish our origin and culture and not be ashamed and disgraced, as it taught us to be strong and determined person. In addition, in any type of connection, it is important to build trust. We shouldn't trust someone simply because they were kind and welcoming. It takes time to recognize who is sincerely concerned and genuine. The next is the sensory imagery. Sight, hearing, touch, smell, and taste. Sight. The first view of the terraces left in Sam's mind a kind of stupefaction which when it had cleared was replaced by a sense of wastefulness. The trip had not been exhausting for there was much to see. The old man looked ancient and in the light of the stove fire that lived and died at one end of the one room house. In the light, he saw that the blood had dried and had lost its color. Second is hearing. Someone in the bus recognized Philip and he called out in the native tongue, Pig. The name did not gel at once and the man shouted again. Second is waiting outside. Some heard the same words of endearment. Third, however, some could heard Philip speaking in the native tongue, and there was also crackled old voice, high-pitched with the excitement and pleasure. And lastly, Philip raised it to his lips and made happy gurgling sound. Sec- and the third is the smell. They had arrived in the summer capital the previous day, and the bracing air and the scent of the pine and had invigorated him. Second, talking and smelling of the earth and strong tobacco. Third is the wool house smelled of the feet of the chicken droppings and junk earth, but Sam Christie ignored this smell and attended only to the man. Lastly is the air around him was heavy with the smell of sweat, rice wine, and earth. And the second one is touch. Philip Latak picked it up and gave it to the old man who was kneeling. He held the Ifugao by the arm, but Sadik screamed free from the grasp. And then lastly, the taste. I was taken ill when I was young, something I ate up. I ate, perhaps. Some Christie accepted the drink, washed it down his throat, politely, excruciatingly, for it was the first time that he took warm coke, and it curdled his tongue. To some, the old man extended a bowl of rice wine, and some took it and lifted it to his lips, savored the gentle tongue and acridness of it. After the chef had savored every drop in his glass, he claimed, "Indeed, I am honored to taste this most wonderful hospitality which should be reserved only for important peoples." And now let's move to the symbolism. The ancient god figurine represents the Philippine, which is the rich culture of the indigenous people and transmitted by our ancestors and the colonization of the other nations. Number two is the rice terraces. It denotes the uniqueness of the Philippines, which various countries adore. It also highlights the way of life of the Filipino in the province and their simplicity and loyalty. Third is Manila. Manila means modernization and civilization of the people. It also illustrates the comparison between how people lived previously and presently. Sam Christie depicts countries that have colonized the Philippines, denied the liberty of a former Filipino, and used their weaknesses in the situation where they might be deceived. Philip Latak denotes those people, after success in life, have forgotten their origin and family and have left out their existing tradition in favor of the modern society and trends. Sadek depicts our heroes who tirelessly fight for the Philippines for the independence of its people. Rice wine symbolizes the blood of Ifugaos as they continue to preserve the cultivation of Ifugaos and its tradition for its future. To conclude, again, I'm Amanda Claire Aitapia, and this is the literary analysis of The God Stealer by Francisco Shuniluse. Asumpal salamat ug sikayon amin.
Gratitude to Ms. Ebron, Ms. Siligbon, and Ms. Tapia, and that's all for Region 1 Ilocos Regions, Francisco Chenil Jose's biography, and his The God Stealer's literary work description and literary analysis. Moving forward to discuss a brief overview for the Region 2, here is Miss Jane Pancha.
Mapiya nga uma, I am Jane Pancha and I'm one of the presenters for today. So now let's move forward to the last but not the least region, the Region 2. To begin with, let's first identify the Region 2. Region 2 is composed of 5 provinces, which is Batanes, Cagayan, Isabela, Quirino, and Nueva Vizcaya, and 4 towns, which is Tuguegarao, Kawayan, Ilagan, and Santiago. That makes up DTI Region 2, also known as the Cagayan Valley Region. Did you know that Region 2 has an abundant supply of agricultural products such as rice, peanuts, beans, and fruits? The Cagayan Valley region ranks first among producers and second among palay producers in the Philippines. Agribusiness, bamboo, homestyles and wearables, information technology, business process management, e-commerce, and tourism, agritourism are some of the priority sectors being promoted for development by DTI Region 2. Through the joint efforts of all concerned line agencies and stakeholders, Region 2 is striving to achieve its desired role as the country's prime water resource, agro-industrial hub, and emerging tourism destination. As part of its effort to promote investment prospects, the Region 2 has established itself as the gateway to the northern Philippines. So that's all. We are done introducing Region 2. Now let's proceed to the main event, which is identifying one of the authors in Region 2. Fernando M. Maramag Jr. from Ilagan, Isabela is one of the most well-known literary authors in Region 2. And here is Arabella Robledo, who will provide us with an overview of his life and contributions to Philippine literature. The floor is yours, Ms. Robledo.
Thank you, Binibining Pansya. Marahay na hapon sa inyong lahat. My name is Arabella F. Robledo and I'm the one who's in charge for presenting the autobiography of the chosen author from Region 2. We will be introducing one of the most well-known author, which is Fernando Mamuri Maramag, and one of his notable work, The Rural Maid. So who is Fernando Maramag? Fernando Mamuri Maramag, he is the son of a wealthy landowner, Rafael Maramag and Victoria Mamuri. He was born on January 21, 1893 in Ilagan, Isabela, and died on October 23, 1936 at the age of 43. Fernando finished his secondary education in 1908, and he entered Philippine normal school, and he transferred to University of the Philippines due to his insistence of his father. In UP, he became the editor-in-chief of the organization of the Writing School Organization. And his relationship status during the time that he was teaching at San Juan de Letran and University of the Philippines, he met his wife Consolacion Ablanza, and at the age of 22, they got married and they had 6 children. After he graduated from University of the Philippines, at the age of 21, he was named as the Instituto of the Manila. He also became the English professor at University of the Philippines and San Juan de Letran. He also became in 1917, he became the mamali po yung slide. He became the editor in Rising Philippines. He also became the chief of director in Department of Justice, writer and editor at several magazines including Manila Tribune, Philippine National Weekly, and Philippine Herald. Due to all his credentials, he was also given an opportunity to work as a technical writer and technical assistant of Pangulong Manuel L. Quezon. Fernando was an eminent poet and journalist during his time. Some of his literary work like May Queen Tagala, A Christ Without a Cross, The Presentation were adored and devoured by public readers. Additionally, 7 of his work were anthologized and covered to Leopoldo Illaves' Book of Filipino Essay in 1910 to 1954, which has become the standard textbook of Philippine English class in universities. So, his literary works are The Sonnet on Sympathy, Moonlight on Manila Bay, The Rural Maid, Oni Rose, Lost Friendship, My Queen Tagala. So that's all for the literary work of Region 2. Back to you, Miss Tansha.
Absolutely amazing. From what we have heard from Mr. Bleda, Mr. Maramag Jr. has several notable accomplishments to his credit. Thank you very much, Mr. Bleda. Following that, Maria Cristina Tobale is here, will offer us a description of Fernando M. Maramag Jr.'s literary masterpiece.
you, Miss Arbella, for giving details on the biography of Fernando Maramag. Good afternoon, everybody, and the our teacher for today. I am Maria Cristina, and thank you for being here today to listen to our report. Today, I'd like to share you about literary description of this author. One of the reasons why Fernando M. Maramag is one of the famous author in the region too is because given that the most of his work are poetry, we can claim that he performed exceptionally well and that he was able to imprint practically all of his work in our memory. Fernando M. Maramag employs a narrative style in his work because the majority of his work is based on the Junai events and represent what is happening in the real life. A rich style and a deep awareness of human nature were two characteristics that exemplified how a use of storytelling style was ingrained in his type. He is also described as a journalist who writes on the events that take place in our life. He is aware of the true events that have occurred in the relationship, particularly if they are reflected in the our feelings that exist. Although his work are extremely impressive, it still hasn't received any awards yet due to the fact that the literary works of Region 2 was just recently discovered. However, we can still enjoy his literary work because some of them were posted online. The Rural Maid is a kind of pretty narrative style because there is a reality that can also happen in the real life. This one good example of hopeless dreamer passion for a girl, and he could never it on. Moreover, it is about a love of the painful kind, a one-sided love. The Rural Maid is about a guy who felt hopelessly in love at the first sight with a girl. He was heartbroken because the girl was in her relationship. However, that didn't stop him from loving her even though he haven't seen her anymore ever since he first saw her. Several years pass and he dreamed about her, and he's still hoping that he will meet her again and have a chance to get loved by her someday. That's all for literary work description of Fernando Maramag. Back to you, Miss Jane.
Thank you so much, Ms. Tubale. Moving on, before we go into the literary analysis of the Rural Maid, let us extend a warm welcome to Miss Bea Torreda. Christina already discussed the brief Rural Maid. Allow me, Rivera Q. Torreda, to read and interpret it for you. First, let me discuss the meaning of Zai, Blow Art, V, and Vine for it is used. Zai means your, V means you, Blow Art, R, while Vine means you. Audible. Okay, first stanza. Thy glance sweet maid when first met had left the heart that aches for thee. I feel the pain of fond regret, thy heart perchance is not. In this stanza, he said that the first time he met the maiden, he was captivated by her. But also, he was also heartbroken because he found out that she was already in another relationship. We parted though we met no more. My dreams are dreams of thee, fair maid. I think of thee, my thoughts implore, the hours my lips on pine are laid. So in the second stanza, unfortunately, he never knew that the first time he saw her was also going to be the last time, because their paths never crossed again after the first time meeting each other. But ever since then, he always think and dream about her. A dream of them kissing and loving each other. For the third stanza, forgive these words that love impart, and pleading bear the poet's breast. And if a rose with thorns thou art, yet on my breast that rose may rest. So in the third stanza, the guy wanted to apologize for loving the maiden, silence even though he already know that the young maiden is already with someone. He insisted that despite with the complicated setup, he is still willing to love her unconditionally. On the first in the fourth stanza, I know that what the name thy charms, Thou art half human, half divine. And if I could hold thee in my arms, I know both heaven and earth were mine. In the last stanza, he expressed that the beauty and charm of the maiden was tremendous, and how he appreciated her beauty and that he can compare it to divine. That's why in the last two lines, he professed that if she will ever love him back, then he might be the happiest man alive. So yeah, that's all for the interpretation. Let's now move on to our literary analysis. So what is the verse used in the poem? So here in the Rural Maid, Fernando Maramag used rhyme verse. So what does rhyme verse means? It means poem don't have any definite syllabic structure, but it has a rhyming pattern. So as you can observe from this poem, the syllabic pattern is ABAB. For the first stanza, we have met, thee, regret, and me. The second stanza, we have more, paid, implore, and laid. The third stanza, we have impart, rest, thou art, and rest. And lastly, on our last stanza, we have charms divine, arms, and me. So what is the figurative language used in the poem? In this poem, the author uses metaphors and hyperbole to express the emotion. There, you can see it on the second line of the first stanza where the guy said that his heart aches for thee. Where he uses hyperbole to express how sad he is by knowing the fact that the maiden isn't available anymore. On the third stanza, he uses bare the poet's breast as a metaphor to express her genuine love if a rose with and if a rose thorns thou art, yet on my breast that rose may rest. To express that he is willing to love her even if it means hurting himself. Then lastly, on the last stanza, he uses hyperbole, which is I know both heaven and earth were mine, to express how happy and grateful he is if ever the maiden will love him back. Next slide, please. The theme of this poem is all about love and obsession. And this poem also taught us how love can be so addicting and how to differentiate love and obsession. At first read, you may tell yourself na, oh my gosh, the love, this guy's love for this girl is so genuine. Like he's willing to get hurt just to get loved by her. John, well, in a different situation, maybe it is genuine. But here, I don't think so. The girl is already happy with another man, yet the guy still wants her to be his. And that is not love. It is obsession. Love is not selfish. When you love someone, you want her to be happy. And not being with you is their happiness. Di ba dapat you are willing to let him go? Kasi you love them? Kasi you are concerned about their happiness? And that makes this poem so interesting. Is that it challenged us to use abstract thinking to know the real meaning of the poem. Lastly, we have symbolism. The dream and imagination of the guy represents his strong admiration and genuine love towards the maiden. Then, dun naman sa third stanza, yung line na, if a rose with thorns thou art, yet on my breast that rose may rest. The rose represents the maiden and its beauty, while the thorn represents the hindrance in their relationship. That would be all for our literary analysis. Again, I'm Rivera Cutoreda. I hope you learned something from me and from the poem itself. Back to you, Jane.
Thank you so much to Mr. Blado, Mr. Bale, and Mr. Reda for their assistance. And that concludes the biography of Fernando M. Maramag Jr. of Region 2, and the description and literary analysis of his work, The Rural Maid. And that's all for our 21st century literature from the Philippines and the word performance task presentation for today. I hope that you've gained an understanding about the purpose and contribution of our authors and their literary works towards the promotion and preservation of our traditional Philippine literature in today's technology-driven society. Again, my name is Jane M. Pansha, together with my compatriots
Artiaga Irish Cristalpi,
Ebron, Natalie B.
Lorenzana Kim Ariasa L.
Bledo Arabella,
Siligbon Shairin T.
Tapia Amanda Claire I.
Rivera Q.
Tubale Maria Cristina R.
Valencia Louis Grizel DG.
And Russell Dave G. Valenzuela.
your Group 1 presenter for today. Goodbye and have a good day.
A pleasant morning to everyone. So for our presentation in 21st Literature of the Philippines and the World, I am a control. We chose three regions, the Region 4A Calabar Zone, Region 4B, the Mimaropa, and the Region 5, the Bicol Region. In Region 4A, we have Frank G. Rivera, who wrote the Tekstula ng Pasasalamat, that will be presented by Abihar, Andrade, Aranda, and Dimaandal. For the Region 4B, we have Jose Dalisay Jr. and his screenplay, which is Maging Akin Ka Lamang, and will be presented by Makilan Paglinawan and Rebusquillo. And lastly, for the Region 5, we have Marlene the Bobbies and her literary work, The Sweetest Potato, and will be presented by Calagos, Lagazo, and Bersamin. Now, let us proceed for the Region 4A.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Francel Maria Ella Bihar, and I'll be presenting the author we chose for Region 4A, Calabarzon. Next slide, please. Um, Frank G. Rivera, born on the 29th of February 1948 in Paeta, Laguna, is a multi-awarded writer, actor, visual artist, poet, and is known as a Makati sa cellphone for his notable Textula series or SMS poems. Textula is a combination of the words text and tula, which is a way of writing poetry where the poems are written and read on mobile phones in the form of a text message. He graduated from the University of the Philippines with a degree in Bachelor of Arts in English Filipino. In the 1970s, he led a movement by establishing a folk theater company on the campus of Mindanao State University, which is the Sining Cambayoca. Several of his works are mga dula sa magkakaibang medium in 1982, Darna in 2003, Oyayi ang Zarzuela in 2004, and Jose Rizal, Iba't Ibang Pananaw in 2005. Some of the many awards he received are the 8th Annual Gawad Estetica Awards in the Play category, 1997 Patnubay ng Sining at Kalinangan para sa Tanghalan from the City of Manila, and the 2002 National Book Award from the Manila Critics Circle for his book, Mga Dula sa Magkakaibang Medium. And lastly, the 2005 National Book Award for the Makata sa Cellphone Trilogy. Next slide, please. This is the poetry analysis po. The title of the literary piece that we have chosen is Tekstula ng Pasasalamat. It is a poem from the book Makata sa Cellphone about gratitude and accepting challenges made by veteran theater artist Frank G. Rivera. He wrote the poem in his hospital room in Manila where he was battling cancer. In the piece, he discussed that every one of us has a role to fulfill and a talent that sometimes gets wasted due to being overlooked. But despite the challenges and hardships, there will be chances and opportunities to come. Rivera himself had a rough start, But because he did not give up and because of the people who believed in him, he achieved all his goals. He won great awards, got to travel the world, and show them the talent of the Filipinos. And all of this was made possible by the people who supported him, who he would like to pay all his gratitude to through this poem. Next slide, please. So this is the poem Tekstula ng Pasasalamat. Kanya-kanyang papel na ginagampanan, mundong entablado'y ating kinulayan. Kahit kalsada'y di naiilawan, ang pagganap natin sana'y di nasayang. Ang mga palabas kong naisaloob, ating sandata na sa pakikihamok, sa gadaigdig na problemang sumubok, sa tinriyatrong buhay sa ating humubog. Next slide, please. Laksang suliranin ating kinaharap, di tayo yumaman, hindi rin sumikat. Sa matinding laot ng mga hinagap, naitawid pa rin ang mga pangarap. Ang isinilang ko'y dula, awit, tula. Naglayag at sana'y naghatid ng tuwa. Kahit paminsan ay inaalipusta, mas madalas namin yakapin ng madla. Maraming papuri at parangal, tropeyo at medalyang may kinang nakambal. Kapirasong papel may kambal na aral, kusang iginawat may kasamang dasal. Napakarami ring bayan ang narating, buong Pilipinas inikot, inangkin. Sa ibayong bansa, lalo pinaigting, tatak Pilipinong kilala sa galing. So, that's it po for my part. Hindi po pala. At nangyari lamang ang lahat ng ito, pagkahalukay sa buong pagkatao. Sa pinakapusod naroon ng totoo, mangingibabaw ang pagka-Pilipino. Mga sinimulay nagwawakas lahat, ngunit mahalagay na pagtanto agad. Maraming tumulong para makaangat, sa inyo handog ko ang pasasalamat. So, that's it po for my part.
Good morning, everyone. Am I audible po?
Yes po. Please turn on your camera, anak.
So, good morning, everyone. This poem, written by Frank Rivera, is a 12-syllabic poem in which every line of the stanza or the entire poem consists of 12 syllables. For illustration, I put a line dividing each syllable in every line so we can count it properly. So, as you can see, if we count the syllables of each line has a syllable of 12. Kanya-kanyang papel na ginagampanan, mundong entablado'y ating kinulayan. Kahit kadalas ay di naiilawan, ang pagganap natin sana'y di nasayang. Next slide, please. Next is the rhyming pattern. Tekstula ng Pasasalamat is a quatrain type of poem which features 4 lines of verse, usually have a alternate rhyming lines, but different rhyming patterns can be used. If we observe and analyze the poem, there are 2 types of rhyming patterns that we can identify. First is the monorhyme, in which all the lines in a stanza or entire piece of poetry ends with the same rhyme. Examples of this are the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th stanza of this poem. The second type of rhyme scheme that can be seen in this poem is the enclosed rhyme. The first and 4 lines and the second and third lines rhyme with each other. The pattern is ABBA, in which A encloses the D. Example of this is the second stanza of the Tekstula ng Pasasalamat. If some of you wonder why the naisaloob and humubog in the second stanza are considered as rhymes and labeled as A, which encloses the B, it is because there are rhymes that are formed by words with similar but not identical. It is called slant rhymes, also known as half rhyme, imperfect rhyme, or a near rhyme. However, there are some lines in a few stanza that do not fit in any rhyming pattern, such as the first, second, and eighth stanza. That's all po for my part.
Hello po, ma'am. Nakikinig po ako. So, the moral of the story po is appreciation. Appreciation for the people who supported him and believed in his abilities. Appreciation for the people who chose to stay despite witnessing his vulnerability, and appreciation for the people who helped him to achieve his goals. Next, next slide, please. The moral of the poem is do not be afraid to showcase your talent and nurture it. Little by little, people will recognize your talent, but do not forget that with recognition comes criticism. Even if there are people who are trying to bring you down, do not let them affect you and continue improving because, in the end, your talent and skill will speak for themselves. Aside from Frank G. Rivera, many other Filipino singers, athletes, artists, and entrepreneurs show their talent and passion representing not just their region, but the entire country. Like Regine Velasquez as the Asia's songbird, Manny Pacquiao as the only boxer in history to win 12 major world titles in 8 different weight divisions, Heidelin Diaz becoming the first Olympian of the Philippines, and the biggest of them all, Henry C. From one sari-sari store vendor became the shopping mall king of Asia. These people are the proof that no obstacle or criticism can discourage them from continuing to improve their talents and passion in order to achieve their goals. That's all po.
Hello po. Rinig po. Okay, figurative languages. So, figurative language is a creative use of words that uses the words that is different from its usual meaning to convey a complicated meaning and um, to apply a creative writing. It uses an ordinary sentence to refer to something without directly stating it. So it's naturally connotative. So moving on to the first one, mundong entablado ay ating kinulayan. It's a metaphor because it is a comparison without using the words like and such as. Kasi yung mga gumagamit po nun is simile. It compares mundo and entablado without the word like or such or any of those words that shows the comparison of these two. My interpretation here is that the author is trying to say is trying to sh- is referring to showing his or our talent to the world. You know, whenever people showcase their talent, it always have to be on stage, right? So the phrase ating kinulayan is showcasing our talents and the world serves as our stage. Second one, gadaigdig na problema, hyperbole, because it was an exaggeration. Hyperbole is an exaggeration that is created to emphasize a point or to bring out a sense of humor. Um, so the meaning of this is, you know, when sometimes people really feel like they have the whole universe on their back, right? When they have a problem. Um, but we can never measure our problems. Like it's impossible to literally have a problem that is as big as the universe. Third one, laksang suliranin, also hyperbole. Just like the previous phrase, they have the same meaning. At first, I don't also know the meaning of the word laksa, but I googled it and it means 1,000. So it's an exaggeration because maybe we can count our problems sometimes, like we can elaborate, but it's impossible to, like, when you have when you I mean whenever wait lang. Okay, if ever you really do have 1,000 problem, like, will you still bother to count it, right? So it's nearly impossible to have 1,000 problems. Next one is laot ng mga hinagap. Pretty much the same. Ano ba ako? Tama. Pretty much the same as the previous one because it basically means a shore of doubts or suspicions. Also an exaggeration. Next one, naitawid pa rin ang mga pangarap. Personification because personification is the attribution of human characteristics to non-living objects. It helps the readers to imagine. So naitawid is crossing over or walking across. Dreams don't walk, only humans and animals can walk across something, so obviously it's personification. Ang isinilang ko'y dula, awit, tula. It's also personification because only humans can give birth to humans, obviously. Next slide, please. Yakapin ng madla, personification slash hype or hyperbole because it somehow applies it somehow shows an attribution of human characteristics that is applied to onto something, and also hyperbole because it's also an exaggeration. Tropeyo at medalyang may kinang nakambal, personification. Also, the kapirasong papel may kambal na aral. It's actually just personification because they kind of have the same properties. They use kambal, which is a human characteristic, and applied it to something. Buong Pilipinas inikot inangkin. Hyperbole, it's also an exaggeration because Philippines is an archipelago with so many islands, so it's nearly impossible to go all around, like literally go all around the country. Paghalukay sa buong pagkatao, also hyperbole because we all know the word pagkahalukay is an exaggeration, right? Kaya sa pinakapusod na raw ng totoo. Personification because it it applies the word pusod, which is a human characteristic, to into the phrase. Next slide, please. Symbolisms. Symbolism is an artistic poetic style using symbolic images and indirect representation to convey an expression or a message. It uses symbols to represent ideas or qualities. So first one, di naiilawan, symbolizes not being in the spotlight or not being recognized. So it portrays a disappointing feeling of not being recognized for something you think you are best at. Okay, next one. Laot ng mga hinagap, it represents all the problems and obstacles faced. It refers to the amount of struggles the author has faced along his journey to his dreams. Tropeo at medallia represents achievements and recognition. So medals and trophies are given to individuals who won a competition, right? So it is used to represent achievement. Kapirasong papel may kambal na aral symbolizes the amount of knowledge that can be shared with a piece of paper. It emphasizes the importance and impact of the written knowledge that is shared through a piece of paper. Tatak, Tatak Pilipino represents all the things and talented people that originated in the Philippines. Tatak is literally stamp, right? It is used to identify where something came from. So Tatak Pilipino symbolizes everything and everyone that represents the identity of Filipinos. Maraming tumulong para makaangat represents the people who helped the author to survive and thrive. The word makaangat did not literally mean going up. It symbolizes success. Like in English, to be on top. When you're on top, you're successful. That's what it portrays. That's all.
Region 4B, the Mimaropa region, composed of Mindoro, Marinduque, and Romblon and Palawan. Jose Dalisay Jr. or Butch Dalisay was born in January 15, 1954, a Filipino writer and won numerous awards and prizes for fiction, poetry, drama, nonfiction, and screenwriting, including 16 Palangka Awards. Dalisay has authored more than 30 books since 1984, and six of those have garnered National Book Awards from the Manila Critics Circle. In 1998, Dalisay made it to the Cultural Center of the Philippines Centennial Honors List as one of the 100 most accomplished Filipino artists of the past century. Among his numerous books are Old Timer and Other Stories, Sarcophagus and Other Stories, Killing Time in a Warm Place, and many more. Dalisay has won 16 Palanca Awards in five genres. For winning at least five first prize awards, he was elevated to Palanca Hall of Fame in 2000. He has also garnered five Cultural Center of the Philippines Awards for playwriting and FAMAS, Urian, Star, and Catholic Mass Media Awards and citation for his screenplays.
Today, today, we will present to you one of the screenplays created by Mr. Jose Dalisay, or also known as Butch Dalisay Jr. This is entitled Maging Aking Kalamang, which was produced in the year 1987 under Viva Films and directed by Lino Broca, and the story was written by Rick Aquino. There are 11 casts, including Christopher De Leon as Andy Abrigo, Lorna Tolentino as Rosita Monteverde, Dina Bonevi as Elsa Abrigo, Jay Iligan as Ernie Balboa, Toby Alejor as Rick Rivera, Jaime Fabregas as Dr. Mendes, and the other cast are Cecilia Garucho, Subas Herrero, Coco Trinidad, Raquel Villavencio, and Ernie Zarate. Next slide po. So now we will be proceeding on the screenplay analysis. First, we have characters and characterization. Andy Abrigo, an architect, husband of Elsa, father of Adrian Monteverde. He was an apprentice of Coledo and Associates and designed the Culture Center. He was assigned as chief in Design Services Department. He was appointed by Rosita as vice president for special projects. He left Elsa before without notice to work abroad as an architect, but later he decided to settle in the Philippines. And lastly, he remained loyal to his love for Elsa despite all the temptations
that Rosita was giving to him. Next slide po. Persita Monteverde. She's a rich, beautiful, and socially active person. She's good at cooking. She was obsessively in love with Andy Abrigo, a man who loved someone else. She had a thing with Andy, a sole heiress of his late father, Don Vicente, chairman of the board and president of the Green Mountain Development Company. She'll do everything she'll do and give everything for the sake of love, and she fled to Los Angeles and stayed for 6 years to hide Adrian from his real parents. She treats him as her child. Next is Ernie Azurin, a good person and gentleman. He loves Rosita, workmate of Rosita, head of the design department. Rosita's father wants him to marry his daughter. Appointed as vice president lastly, he was temporarily assigned as chief executive officer and handled the company for the meantime while Rosita is away. Next slide po. Elsa Parwell Abrigo, wife of Andy Abrigo, mother of Adrian Monteverde, friend of Rosita. She lost his first child after giving birth, and the doctor told him that she can't be able to bear another child. She was longing for a child whom she can consider as her own. She'll do everything to get back her child in her arms. She felt a strange feeling or connection when she first saw Adrian Monteverde. She strongly believed that Adrian was her long lost child. Next is Adrian Monteverde, child of Elsa and Andy Abrigo. He was taken away by Rosita and bring him to Los Angeles to keep him away from his real parents, sole heir of Rosita Monteverde. Next slide po. And lastly, Dr. Mendes, a doctor in Monteverde General Hospital. He was offered to be the new director of the hospital he worked at in exchange for one condition, and that is to declare that the child which Elsa gave birth to is dead and to keep the secret that Rosita took their child.
Anak, we can't hear you po.
Genre and setting will be discussed po by Ali Paglinawan.
Good morning, rinig na po? Okay. So for this slide po, I will discuss the genre and setting in the movie, of the story in the movie. First, for the genre of the movie po, it can be romance or drama. It was romance po since the plot mainly revolved on the excessive love that each of the main characters possess. From the beginning up to the end of the film, the emotions and affections between the characters were clearly expressed. Then it can also say that it was a drama because it portrays real life scenarios or let's say extreme situations with emotionally driven characters. Then for the setting, the span of the story was almost over 7 years and it took place in the following locations. First, in the airport. This setting was used in the movie to show that a character came back to the country from abroad. Second one, in Rosita Monteverde's house. This is the setting used in the near beginning of the movie. This can be further explained and discussed in the plot po. Third one, the Green Mountain Development Company. So this company was actually owned by Rosita, where most of the scenes in the movie were taken place. The next, in Elsa Abrigo's office. From the word itself, it is where Elsa was working. Then, the resort complex. Actually, this resort complex was Andy's project on Rosita's company po. But then, it became also one of the settings of the story. Next, a hotel in Baguio where Andy proposed to Elsa. Then in the church, it is where Elsa and Andy's wedding was taken place. Next, in Abrigo's residence. This setting po was used to show how Andy and Elsa lived as a married couple. Next one, clinic of Dr. Mendes. This is the place po where Elsa comes for checkup when she was pregnant. Then in the hospital. So in the hospital where Andy's operation was taken place po. And last one is in the court of the law. So that's all po for the setting of the story. For further understanding po, these places will also be discussed and mentioned on the plot. Then for the next slide, which is all about the point of view of the story in the movie, here is Mira Makilan again, who will discuss it for you.
Point of view. It uses the first person point of view, but it does not only focus on the perspective of one character. The perspective of each character was shown in the whole movie, and each of their dialogue uses first person point of view like they were talking about themselves po.
So now for exposition po. In this part of the plot, the background information and description of the main characters are explained. It also included informations about the events that happened before the story began. So the story started with Andy Abrigo, who was a handsome and bearded man. He left his job as an architect in the United States and returned to the Philippines to settle. And as Andy arrived in the country, he heard from his friend that they will have a reunion on Rosita Monteverde's house. So Andy decided to attend in the reunion. He saw there Elsa Paruel, his ex-girlfriend, who he had left without notice when he went abroad, and then Rosita Monteverde, his childhood friend who was obsessed with him. At the reunion, everyone was having a good time. The clatter of cutlery mingles with the constant chatter in each table, and in the middle of it all, there was Rosita on one side talking to Andy about their past and how they had a one-night stand while Andy was still in a relationship with Elsa. While on the other side, there was a man named Ernie Azurin, and he was madly in love with Rosita. He was looking closely to how Rosita and Andy talk. So, this has a backstory po. This was not stated in the movie, and we just do some research for this. Okay, so Elsa is a travel agent po when she accidentally meets Andy, with whom she falls in love. But then Rosita seduced Andy and they had a one-night stand. Then when Rosita's father found out about his daughter's affair with Andy, who is his secretary's son, he sent Andy abroad. So Andy po was the son of secretary of Rosita's father. And and Andy being afraid that Rosita's father will fire his mom he decided to go and leave Elsa heartbroken. He didn't let Elsa know about this because he said that it will be harder for him to leave. So that's it po for exposition. Next slide po. Okay, for the rising action, this is the longest part of the plot po. So for first in the rising action is when Elsa and Andy started dating again. And since Andy was living again in the Philippines and he has an experience as an architect po, Rosita offered him to work on her company. And since they have something in the past, Andy asked and assured that it will only be strictly business. Then Andy accepted her offer and he was appointed to manage and design a resort complex where rich and wealthy people can afford to stay and check in. Then after a couple of months, Rosita asked Andy to accompany her in the site of the resort that Andy is working on. They stayed there for one day and one night, and they chose an executive suite. All Andy knows was they went there only for work, but Rosita Sims didn't just go there for work. So while Andy was relaxing on a jacuzzi pool, she took the opportunity to seduce him. She kissed him hungrily, but Andy was able to control himself and stop her from kissing him. Then next slide po. Okay, Rosita asked Andy what's wrong and why he can't accept her. She even questioned her worth as a woman and begged Andy to love him back. She was crying in front of Andy. She can give Andy everything and can do anything just for her to have him. But Andy can't love Rosita back because who he truly loves was Elsa. So after hearing the words of Rosita, Andy decided to leave her in the suite and immediately drove his car to a hotel in Baguio where Elsa is staying. And as Elsa opened the door, Andy quickly asked her to marry him. In the whole night, they made love to each other. Andy also told Elsa that he will resign on his work in Rosita's company when they come back in Manila. Then in the following day, Rosita came for work and asked her staff where Andy was. And eventually, she knew that Andy was absent and he was with Elsa in Baguio. Then an idea came to Rosita. She immediately told Ernie that they will go to Baguio to have a quick break from work. But her true agenda there is to follow Elsa and Andy. Okay, next slide po. Upon arrival on the hotel, Rosita easily found Elsa by asking the staff there. Then she convinced Ernie to have a breakfast in the place where the two were eating. When they had met, Rosita invited Andy and Elsa to have a dinner in their suite. And in their dinner, Ernie already knew that Rosita lied to him and he was only using the possessiveness of Rosita for Andy. So after Andy and Elsa left their suite, he was so angry to Rosita to the point that he forced and raped her. In the next day, Rosita's father died due to heart attack. So all her father's left properties were legally transferred to Rosita. Rosita was also appointed to be the new chairman of the board and president of the company, while Ernie became the executive vice president. Afterwards, Rosita used her authority to appoint Andy as the vice president of special projects in company. However, as what Elsa and Andy had talked, Andy was planned to resign, but because of the request of Rosita, he decided to decline it. Andy also opened to Rosita that he will marry Elsa soon and he hoped that she will respect their decision. So next slide po. After months of preparation, Andy and Elsa's wedding went well. And while they are having the reception, Rosita and Ernie left early because Rosita could no longer handle the pain she was feeling. But despite of her pain, she still managed to congratulate Elsa and Andy and give them a land property as a wedding gift. Then Elsa got pregnant right away while Rosita was miserable every day. But one day, Rosita made an agreement to Dr. Mendes. Dr. Mendes was Elsa's personal doctor. Rosita will appoint Dr. Mendes as the new director of the hospital, but in return, he will secretly get Elsa's baby when she gives birth. And when Elsa woke up after giving birth, the doctor said that her baby didn't survive and she can't give birth anymore. So Elsa could not believe what she had heard and she almost lost her mind. But the truth here was the baby is alive po and it's only on Rosita's hand, living on the Los Angeles. And after losing his child, Andy's division also in the company was abolished by Ernie. Since Rosita was already living on the Los Angeles, Ernie was appointed as the new chief executive officer. So after hearing what Ernie wants, Andy decided to resign. Next slide. Then 6 years had passed. Rosita, together with Adrian, who was Elsa's child, came back in the Philippines. Rosita also came back in managing her company. Then Rosita threw a party where she invited Andy and Elsa. She also introduced Adrian as her son and said that his father is someone she met in Los Angeles. Because Ernie knew Rosita very well, he felt that there's something wrong on what Rosita had said about Adrian. He suspected that he is the father of Adrian, but Rosita contradicted him and repeatedly emphasized that Ernie is not the father of the kid. Until Elsa told Andy that she has a strong feeling that Adrian is their child. She also said that she always had a dream of a crying baby. But Andy kept on reminding her that their child was already dead. But one day while Andy's friend was having a good time with him, he mentioned that when he went out of the country 6 years ago, he had seen Rosita and a baby with her, and Rosita claimed that the baby she was carrying is her nephew. Okay, next slide po. As Andy heard what his friend said, he immediately drove his car to Dr. Mendes and forced him to tell what truly happened to his child. This is because Andy knew that Rosita is an only child po, so it is impossible for her to have a nephew. Later on, Elsa and Andy decided to file a case against Rosita. And along on the hearing of the case, Dr. Mendes' conscience couldn't handle what was happening. So he admitted to Elsa that he stole their child and gave it to Rosita. But for Adrian not to suffer on the situation, Elsa decided to end the case, while Rosita made an agreement with her. Rosita will give Adrian to Elsa, but in return, Elsa will allow Andy to frequently go with her. So Andy got so angry with what Elsa wanted him to do. But Elsa had already agreed to Rosita and she was desperate to be with her child. So Andy had no choice but to follow his wife wanted to happen. he was with Rosita most of the time, even or outside the work. Until one day, Rosita announced to the board of directors that she will promote Andy to be the new director of the company. Okay, that's all po for rising action. Next will be the climax. So next slide po. For the climax po, Ernie got so angry with the fact that after so many years of being loyal and hardworking for the company, Rosita still chose Andy over him for that position. He couldn't control himself and quickly grabbed a gun and fired it to Andy. Okay, next slide po for falling action. Okay, falling action. First, Andy was immediately run into the hospital. He was critical and needed to undergo to an operation. Then Elsa also went to the hospital after she found out what happened to her husband. She saw the Rosita. She was angrily crying with Rosita and put all the blame to Rosita. But thankfully, Andy's operation went successful po. Then Rosita went to the hospital to talk to them. When Andy was almost to death, Rosita had realized all the things she had done. She was crying and sincerely apologized to Andy and Elsa, especially on stealing Adrian from them. She also gave them an envelope before she bid a goodbye and decided to come back to Los Angeles for good. And the last, for falling action po, Rosita emotionally talked to Adrian. She told him to be a good son to his parents and always take care of them. So that's it po for falling action. Next slide, please. Finally, for the last part of the plot, the resolution. The resolution of the story is when Andy and Elsa opened the envelope which came from Rosita. It was containing documents which stated that Rosita transferred all her assets and properties to Adrian. So that's all po for the plot. For the next slide, which is all about the conflict of the story, here is Mira Makilan who will discuss it for you.
There are two conflicts presented in the movie. The first one is character versus self. This is when Andy Abrigo decided to remain loyal on his love for Elsa Paruel despite all the temptations that Rosita Monteverde is giving to him. He resists the temptations and the temporary happiness it gives and divert his mind about the person he truly loves. We can see here that Andy was fighting with his inner feelings. He's choosing between his love for Elsa or the temptation that will only give him a short term happiness. The next one is character versus character. Because of her obsession, Rosita Monteverde seduces Andy Abrigo on every chance she gets with the intention to break his relationship and test his love for Elsa Parwell. In here, Rosita's obsession is fighting against Andy's loyalty. Next slide. The first theme of the story is money can't buy you everything, even love. Money can't always give you everything that you wanted, just like love. It is not something that you can buy with any fortune. Love is always bestowed as a gift, freely, willingly, and without expectation. It shouldn't be demanded, and you don't need to beg someone to receive it from them. We don't love to be loved, we love to love. And the next one is love is not being selfish, rather, it is being selfless. If you truly love that person, you'll not force him to love you the way you do. You should learn to accept the fact that you are not meant for each other. And you should learn to let him go with someone he truly loves and you're willing to give up everything just for the sake of his happiness. Pain is inevitable when you're loving someone, but it should not be intentional. Fighting for your love is not bad, but it should not go to the extent that you're ready to hurt the feelings of others just to possess the one that you love. Next one is the moral of the story. Next slide. It is not about what you have and what you will get when you love someone. It is about their purity and kindness or the inner characteristic. There are always consequences to every choice and decision. Selecting bad deeds will result in terrible results, while doing good deeds will lead to good results or even more. Remember, regret always comes at the end of the day, and we should forgive the sinners. Also, when we are loving someone, we should not expect something in return. We should wait patiently until they learn to love us back. And it's not bad that we're willing to give everything we have to the person that we love, but being obsessive to someone who's not yours is being selfish. In fact, you cannot seek true love on other people. It is found when we learn to respect ourselves and when we are happy and satisfied with everything that we have. And also, I want to share to you this verse about love from First Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4 to 7. It says that love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it is it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrong. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. And lastly, for the film contents is symbolism. Uh, the first one is deed of sale. It symbolizes Rosita's being martyr in love, that, that even if she is deeply hurt on seeing his beloved man marrying another woman, she still managed to congratulate them on their wedding and never give up on loving him. The next one is property deeds. It symbolizes Rosita's repentance for all the things she'd done to the couple and especially to their child, Adrian. And lastly is the airplane, which symbolizes Rosita's giving up her obsessive love for Andy and forgiving herself. That's all. Po.
Next is for the cinematic effects of the film. For the cinematic effects, the soundtrack basically it includes both dialogue and music, as well as the other sounds in a film. But in my examples that I provided, I focus to the sounds only, and also it enhances the atmosphere of the film, which suits the situation as well as catches attentions or the emotion of the audiences. Rinig po ba?
Try to share your content again. And then on the right side, there is the option of include computer sound.
Sige po, ma'am. For the melancholy soundtrack. For the sensual. We also use bubble effects to enhance. Next. Ay, hala. Bagay. For the intense, as we observe and sa pagkakarinig natin ng mga soundtracks, we can feel the character's emotion without knowing the exact situation or scenes. That's how they persuade the audiences through sound or through the soundtrack, which sung by Pilita Corrales entitled by Maging Akin Ka Lamang. But I didn't found the song, so I can provide it to all of you. Next, we have the use of cameras.
Very nice. I like it.
Any suggestions?
None. Perfect.
The use of camera basically it tackles about how camera works. Cinematographers and directors can modify the audience's perspective without cutting or just by moving the camera only. In films, certain camera motions can have a psychological and emotional impact on the audiences. These effects can be utilized to enhance the immersion and engagement in the film. It adds a forward movement, pace, and intensity and allows audience to join the action. Now let's take a look again on the examples. We will observe the different angles and shots that is included in the movie.
Very nice. I like it.
Any suggestions?
None. Perfect.
So in the close-up shot, it is a very close shot where the camera lens focuses only on the detail or the actor's face.
Excuse me. I'd like to ride my bicycle with you.
So for the medium shot, it is a shot where the camera lens picks up some background or upper half of the actor. So dito sa medium shot, nakikita rin natin yung close-up shot. Kasi hindi lang sila, sa use of camera, hindi lang sila nagsusustain sa isang shot. They used to enhance it more and mas mapakita pa sa atin yung emotions ng characters. For the full shot, it is a shot where the camera lens has full view of the actor. So nakita natin ayan, si Andy Abrigo, full view of the actor. So yan. Dito sa full shot, from head to toe, kailangan, yun yung magde-describe na isa siyang full shot. So for the long shot, it is taken or the shot taken at a distance from a object. So also in for the long shot, kasama yung background and yung object is malayo sa camera. Next, we have the two shot.
Sometimes, he's rather boring. Pero he's a good man. Paborito siya ng papa.
Lovers ba kayo?
Ano sa palagay mo?
Kung hindi man yun ang akala niya.
So for the two shot, it shows the two subjects in the same frame. So commonly, madi-describe natin ang two shot when there are two speakers. Like yung nakita natin, dalawa sila nag-uusap. Then, minsan may shoulder level yung camera, then kita lang yung likod, then focuses on the one character. Next, we have the angles that used in the film.
Hello? Pwede makausap si Elsa?
Wala ko siya eh.
Saan nagpunta?
Sa Baguio, may conference po siya.
So for straight on angle, the camera was only focused on the character with the same height of the object. So yung camera is straight, straight lang siya and nakafocus dun sa main character. Next, we have the high angle.
Sino daw?
Rosita po, sir.
So yung high angle, the camera is filming from above the object. As you can see naman, yung object na tinutukoy natin is yung the background or the place where ito yung ginaganap yung birthday ni Adrian. Next is the low angle. Dito sa example na to, makikita rin natin yung high angle and low angle, alternate sila. Yung pagko-communicate ni Elsa and yeah.
Did you say thank you to your Tita Elsa?
Yes. Ang cute-cute talaga nitong anak mo.
Did you say thank you to your Tita Elsa?
Yeah. That's a low angle shot. This is the camera is looking up at the object. So nasa taas yung camera and nasa baba yung kinukunan. And if high angle, ay ano ba? Mali pala. Yung low angle, nasa baba yung camera, nasa taas ang kinukunan. Ang high angle, nasa taas ang camera, nasa baba ang kinukunan. For the lighting, lastly, the lighting of the film, it focuses the audience attentions on the main character or object in the film. It also sets the mood or atmosphere. Also, in the lighting reflects the psychology of characters, the amount, the size, the color, and the harshness of light surrounding a character can be adjusted to match their emotions. Also, lighting defines and supports the genre of the film. There are I researched that there is a two lighting that I've seen in the film, which is the high key lighting, which provide bright and illuminating, and low key lighting, which is the darker with a lot of shadows. And we will observe this on the following examples. On the first example, ito yung nangyari sa Baguio in the hotel na sabi dun sa plot kanina na re-rapin siya pero hindi kinat ko na yung part na may nangyari.
Pamasok butas? Akala mo magagawa mo kung kasangkapan sa mga pangangailangan mong paghahanap. Hindi ako makina. Kailangan mo lang kapag gusto mong gamitin. At kapag sawa ka na ibabasura mong bigla, hindi ako gago.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Akala ko ako lang ang gago. Nagpapakabaliw ako sa'yo. Naghihintay na parang aso sunod-sunod sa mga kagustuhan mo. Mas baliw ka pa pala kaysa sa akin. Mas gago. Hanggang dito, sinusundan mo siya. Hindi ka na nahiya. Kunwari, I don't need an explanation to stay here. Kunwari, I need a break. Kunwari, mas romantic. Bullshit! Lies! All lies! Puro kasinungalingan! Ang sabihin mo, kinakati ka lang. Daig mo pa ang asong kinakati. Gusto mo magpayari kay Andy ngayon? Ha? Ha? Halika! Halika! Ako mag-aalis na kasi ako. Halika!
Next, this is a high key lighting which has bright and illuminating lights.
Buksan natin, dalitin yan natin.
Itong part na to, ito yung niregaluhan siya ni Rosita ng land properties.
Sure. Teka. Lote?
Ha?
Binigyan tayo ng resita ng lote.
Next, in this scene, ito yung after na may nangyari sa kanila ni ano, and this is a low-key light which has darker with a lot of shadows. And
Pinaasa mo ko. Pinapaniwala. Mahal kita, Rosita.
this one also. In those example, we can observe that the additional lighting, such as the lamps, it gives extra to the scene and it enhances the visual and emotions of the characters. For the conclusion, to wrap it all, we can say that the film, Maging Akin Ka Lamang, is a legendary film. From the film contents to the cinematic effects, this film is a great piece of work that can be a real-life scenario and will leave a lesson in the minds and the heart of the audiences. The artists are excellent actors who captivated the audience by displaying their emotions and sentiments through their faces and action. Also, the use of dialogues or the use of word, mapapansin natin na maganda yung structure ng words, then parang connected siya sa emotions and sa pinapakita nila doon as na parang silang sinasapian ng character nila. Nakaka-attract sila ng audience talaga kahit hindi nyo pa napapanood dun sa explain ni Eliza, you can really imagine how the plot or the story well structured. And for the production, the graphics are low quality but with good quality of message. There are certain scenes that have some complications too. So, kung mapapanood nyo siya, hindi smooth yung transitions or yung ibang edits sa mga scenes. Like, hindi katulad ngayon na parang unsmooth ng dating. Yung sa mga movie na kapag sa salamin, bigla na lang mag-iiba yung place. Dito, medyo makalumang style talaga. Tapos, on the scenes, the soundtracks and sound effects are well connected. So, nagko-connect siya sa audience, sa audiences, na-attract niya tayo, nakukuha yung attention ng audience. Also, the lighting which portrays the character's feeling. It was a story, especially to those who have been blinded by love. And in comparison to the contemporary drama films with similar plots, this film is more classic. This is more classical. Like, sa mga napapansin natin ngayon, medyo OA na yung pag-acting sa mga films. Pero dito medyo classical pa, medyo may dating pa. May kahit luma na, may i-intense pa. And through this masterpiece, we can see how Jose Dalisay Jr. had shown his greatness in literature, particularly in doing screenwriting. That's all po, ma'am.
Okay, so now we present to you representative author from Region 5 or the Bicol region. This region composed of 6 provinces: Camarines Norte, Camarines Sur, Albay, Catanduanes, Sorsogon, and Masbate. Yung next slide, please.
Anak, please turn on your camera po.
So our chosen representative author from Region 5 is Dr. Marlene the Bobbies. So Marlene the Bobbies is a Filipino-Australian writer, performer, and scholar. Born on November 25, 1959 in Legazpi City, Albay. So their family was residing at the foot of Mayon volcano. That's why on some of her words, it features as one of her settings, community near the
volcano. So as a child, her main interest was painting, and she only began writing poetry at the age of 10. So for her education, she attended Bicol University High School, and for her undergraduate degree, she took Bachelor of Arts and graduated with summa cum laude at Aquinas University of Legazpi, Master of Arts in Literature at University of Santo Tomas, and Doctorate of Creative Arts at University of Wollongong. Next slide, please. So for her career, Marlene the Bobbies published 4 novels, 6 poetry books, a collection of short stories, a monograph of lectures on creative research, and had 10 dramatic works produced in Australia, Philippines, US, Canada, Spain, Singapore, China, France, Slovakia, and Thailand. She also wrote more than 100 literary, which features our Philippine culture with a mix of her immigrant experience and scholarly works published in various anthologies, journals, and magazines. She taught creative writing for 21 years at the University of Wollongong and English and literature for 10 years at Philippine tertiary institutions such as De La Salle University of Manila, University of Santo Tomas, and Colegio de San Juan de Latian. Next slide, please. So here are some of the works of Marlene the Bobbies and her recognition, but since we're running out of time, I won't discuss na yung, her recognition since it was already mentioned there and on our synchronous class. I'll just give you a brief description of some of her works. So Locust Girl, a love song, this is about people who are struggling to look for life and freedom beyond the border. It's like they were locked inside their community, and when they tried to escape, they are parang being bombed. And this is about a young girl who got buried for 10 years, and it is a story of her journey through destruction. And this represents our politically disrupted world where violence are widespread. So for Fish Hair Woman, this story happened during 1987, a time of civil war, and Australia. A woman with 12-meter long hair, she uses her hair to as a net to retrieve the dead body from the river, and here she fell in love with a visiting Australian writer, Tony, but then Tony disappeared. So this story is about it does not only revolve around romance, but it also discusses politics and history. So for Banana Heart Summer, this is about a young girl named Nini, and she was longing for the love of her mother, and she quit school to work as a maid because she wanted to make her mother proud of her. But then one summer, when the summer was about to end and monsoon was already approaching, her life transformed into something that she did not expect. So next slide, please. So for the kissing or white turtle, so this is a collection of short stories, 23 short stories about hope, which happened in the Philippines and Australia. And for Rita's Lullaby, this is a radio play. And this is about two Manila street kids, Rita and Jay. So Jay earns money through pickpocketing or robbery, while Rita worked as a child prostitute. And, parang at night, they would fantasize about food, and they would try to bury their past, their village life, which was destroyed because of militarization. Next slide, please. So here are some of her works and recognitions. Carlos Palanca Memorial Award in Literature, second prize for Accidents of Composition. Gawad Pambansang Alagad ni Balagtas from the Union ng Manulat ng Pilipinas. Carlos Palanca Memorial Award in Literature, honorable mention for Miss Serena Serenata. Carlos Palanca Memorial Award in Literature, second prize for Lupang Di Hinirang, Kwento at Sikreto. And Carlos Palanca Memorial Award in Literature, first prize for Peopleness. Collection of poems in English, 1987. So next slide. So this is a short description of Sweetest Potato. Of the Sweetest Potato. So the Sweetest Potato depicts the harsh history of the Philippines in two different times, 1987 and 1942. So 1987, this story is a reference in our history. 1987 is during the post-martial law period, and 1942 is during the colonization period. So I won't discuss this further since it will be discussed on the latter part of this presentation. So officials ruling the country were using their power and influence for their own benefits, leaving the Filipinos struggling. Hunger and poverty surfaced, but the people stayed mum. So this short story was published in 2009 and written in first point of view. So this story was being narrated by Bolodoy's brother, but Bolodoy's brother is not the main character of the story. He is just a witness and the one who narrates what happened to his family during these two times. So it is two different stories of farmers with a dream, the one who pursued it and the one who gave up on it. Next slide, please. So ayun, before anything else, we would like to mention lang that this story, The Sweetest Potato, is used for research purposes and are open for different interpretation, and everything included in this presentation are from the own analysis of the group. So next slide. Okay, so for characters and their characterization, Balodoy. So Balodoy is a farmer who loved harvest the most, and he worshipped sweet potato. So he was called by the priest of their church as generous since he would regularly give his harvest sweet potatoes and fishes to the church. So he joined the mayor's militia after their land got was included by the mayor to his plantation. So they don't have any farm on their own. He had no choice but to join the mayor's militia. So mayor's militia is a civilian group who fought against the people. So the sergeant, he was buried with the sweet potato. So the sergeant, it was like the enemy of the village. So people are angry on him. So next slide. So Pai Inyo, a grave digger, so born to a family of rice merchants and was considered rich in Iraya. So during this time, the martial law period, rice merchants are considered rich because rice and corn were the main exports of our country that time. So for Baloday's brother, so he is the one who was narrating the story, and he was the one who also buried the sergeant. So next slide. So Padre Bia, he is the priest of the village, the one Bolodo exchanged his confessions with. So regularly Bolodo would exchange his confessions with Padre Bia. He would ask to be the potato king of sweet potato king of Iraya so that a nice girl would notice him. So for Mamay Dulce, the mother of Bolodoy, he had a big hatred to the church. She worshipped Santa Judith, a feisty and headhunting saint. So on the plot, we'll explain later why Mamay Dulce hates the church. So next. So Mayor Kiko, he oppressed the farmers using the small land. So Mayor Kiko is also the one who included the small farms of Bolodoy on his small plantation, and during elections he would ask for the votes of the farmers as a gratitude as he lended them his lands. So for Carmen, the goddaughter of Mamay Dulce, she was condemned because she got pregnant at 14 and the father was unknown. So next slide. So for Tia Dami, she is the great aunt of Bolodoy. She planted sweet potatoes in the hills and a victim of Japanese brutality. So this time, since there is a war happening in the country, and for people to run away from chaos, they went to the hills. So Kempeitai, they are Japanese soldiers, and Kempeitai were also the ones who killed the two eldest son of Tia Dami. So next slide. So Tia Dami's three sons. So as mentioned, they joined the guerrillas. So guerrillas they are like rebels. So if we will compare it to actual events of our history, if you're familiar with Hukbalahap or the Hukbo ng Bayan laban sa Hapon, they are the one who fight against the Japanese, and after the Japanese colonization, they extend their objective to fight against the Philippine government and ask for for land reform. And Tia Dami's reason, the two eldest sons, as mentioned earlier, they were killed and only the youngest survived. So for tenants, they were once farmers but became tenants of the mayor. So next. Okay, so for the settings, may I call on Miss Francine Calagos to discuss?
The Sweetest Potato short story takes place in the village residing in the hills of Vilaya in the year of 1987 or the post-martial law era Corazon Cuangco Aquino administration. So it was the time that Cory Aquino was elected as an 11th president of the Philippines in the year of 1986. And in 1942, it was the time of Japanese occupation. It is not the main highlight of the story, but rather the main plot revolves in the year of 1987, but 1942 is used by the author to further to guide the readers to further understand the sense or the meaning of this story. So in 1942, it is for the time of the Japanese occupation or the time when the Japanese invade the Filipinos and the time when the Filipinos was under the Japanese ruling and the Japanese military's army or the campaign time. That's all. And for the next position, may I call on again Miss Judel Bersen.
Okay, so for the plot of the story, next. So exposition. So this time, at the start of the story, Baloday's brother remembered what Baloday said to him that to get the sweetest potato, you have to dig deeper, which means that if you want to achieve your dreams, you need to work hard. But this time he was not digging to get the sweetest potato, but to bury the surgeon. So Pai Inyo was talking with Baloday's brother when he advised him to bury the dead deeper, to which the latter did not heed. Instead, he gave the dead sergeant a shallow grave for him to hear the noises and footfalls of the village, not giving him peace for robbing the dreams of the farmers and the villagers. Since Painyo said to Baloday's brother that you have to dig deep so that the dead would have no reasons to turn. So it was 1987 when the country was in chaos. The government decreed to get rid of the communist insurgent. So if we'll compare 1987 to actual events of our country, this was really a time of war. A lot of bombings happened, ambush and protest. So he was preparing for the surgeon's burial when Balodoy crossed his mind. So this time he was examining the knife that the knife of the surgeon that he used for digging, and he 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 was asking himself how come that the surgeon's death seemed so light. And suddenly Balodoy crossed his mind and thought that if only his brother paid attention to his warning. So next slide. Next slide. So Balodoy loved harvest the most. He would visit Patibia and pray to become the sweet potato king of Iraya so that a nice girl would notice him. He would also give fish and potatoes to the priest, which would anger Mamay Dulce, as the woman had long cursed the church for condemning her goddaughter Carmen. So Mamay Dulce was angry at the church because they judged her goddaughter Carmen for being pregnant at the age of 14 and the father was unknown. So when Carmen gave birth, she died, and after her burial, Mamay Dulce also buried all her things related to the church on her old acacia chest, such as church dresses and scapulars, and she would only air it once a year for their village fiesta, thinking that it was a duty for her village and not for the god. So Mamay Dulce had detested the church, however, she had a soft spot for Santa Judith, a feisty and head-hunting saint. So the people of Iraya are not they do not know this side of avenging Saint Judith, so they worship her. However, when Iraya when the parish of Iraya got official, Santa Judith was replaced by the martyr San Sebastian, who died for the love of God. So next slide. So for the rising action, let's hear again from Miss Princeline Calagos.
The rising action states that Mayor Kiko would join the farmlands that have long been the farmer's main livelihood to his common production. So he uses his power to enjoy the land of the farmers to his coffee plantation, using that land titles that he possessed for the titles of ownership. And as well, he uses public militia or the organization of the citizens who are trained to execute the military duties to waive the land of ownership or the titles of ownership to the noses of the farmers. And saying that the lands were in his possession and the farmers were only granted a part of the land. And as well, he uses the land titles to pressure the farmers to vote him in the election as he was planning to run for the governor. As well, he demanded the farmers to be a flying voters of him or those voters who will already registered in the one place or in one location, but then can fly away from other residents and be a registered voter. So flying voter means that a one person can vote more than one, and this is really illegal. So Mayor Kiko uses his power to just demand for that to win the election. And then, as there are already agreement between the farmers and Mayor Kiko, the boundary of 3 meters was the boundary of 3 meters were already agreed with both sides, and Mayor Kiko separate his coffee plantation to the farmer's land. But as for the Doy, the new tenant believed that the no land must remain unused. He planted sweet potatoes in the said boundary, and that will make the mayor infatuated or really angry as there is already an agreement. And so he waived the legal documents that he possessed, reminding the farmers of that. And because of that, the Buludoy, or the farmer Buludoy, is now become tenant, and the worshipper of whims and birth lost his dreams. Next slide, please. So saying this, the man the man born from a family of wise merchants, Pei Inyo, pointed at Buludoy brother, saying that the wealth was beyond physical conquest, the properties, land, cows, and pigs. To which Mamay Dulce replied that the man born from a rich family would never understand as he was never. So, as already stated by Ms. Vidal Bersamin, that during that time, being a wise merchant or a wise farmer is already considered as rich, as during that time is the time where the Philippines export corn, and wise as Marcos already agreed or presented the agrarian reform, where it focuses on the plantation of the corn and rice, and they do not intended to focus on other crops as there is an international commitment to other countries, and also to respect to the countries who provide some goods. And as they in your counter, the people must dream and overcome suffering to dignify themselves. We believe that a person to dignify themselves, we must dream and to surpass all the suffering that is given to us, or the trials or the hindrances that is being thrown to us. And with that, the Borotoy's brother, as if like drugs, pain he used words so pleasing and satisfying for the Borotoy's brother, making him other words of sweet pacifism. Sweet pacifism refers to those non-violent or the peace. He believes about peace, which makes Mama Dulce disappointed because he thought that her son might be in the wrong place. And for a long time, Borotoy's brother believed that transcendence was related to the art of making herself. So transcendence refers to the beyond limitations. And wise coffee means that when you have nothing, you can make a way to have. Like, if you have no coffee, then you can burn a rice, boil it, strain, and add milk if you have. Then you can already have a coffee. So, he prepared a coffee for Buludo. He came home while twisting his hands as if they were cursed. Next slide, please. Buludoy went home and asked his father to why they do not own the farmlands. His father dismissed the question by giving him a wise coffee, saying that it was better than coffee and good for belly. He then realized that Buludoy indeed learned tricks of residents from Mamay Tunset, those tricks that would make a farmer's hands dignified while waiting for a small wage from me. So back then, they don't have anything to do. All they could do than waiting for those small wage from where because they already the tenants. They just use what is available to them, their resources, so they could have something to do or they can feed themselves. And the so-called true father of the village now owned the lands their quiet ancestors used to have. Soon the tenants left the farms to join the rebels of the north. So as they are not contented to have what they have, or as not contented being a tenants of the people in the farms and join the rebels or the groups that is against the rulings of those officials. And next slide please. Next slide please. And for the climax, Golutoy was selected to work under Mayor Kiko's Giulivera, leaving his sweet potatoes behind as he was promoted from being the business tenant. So, as Golutoy already have worship that waves and bird, the climax states that he already gave up, finally gave up and accepted the offer of Mayor Kiko to be one of his militia or those citizens who were going to execute Kiko. That was the time that Roy already gave up his dreams, already gave up his worship of work, and just accepted the thing that he thought he's destined to. That's all. And for the calling action and resolution, I call on Miss Major Wayne.
Hello po, naririnig po ako?
Yes po. Please turn on your camera, anak.
So the following action, after recalling their situation in 1987, Earth felt cold in Balodoy's brother hands after he cleaned the surgeon's grove. Upon staring at the grove, he remembered the tragic history of their great aunt Tia Dalmi. So, yun nga po, Tia Dalmi was a victim of Japanese platoon. This was during Hukbalahap, Hukbong Laban sa Hapon in 1942, where Japanese treat women and call them comfort women and then killing them. Tia Dalmi had three sons. Her three sons nga po, as mentioned kanina po ni Judiel, joined the guerrillas, and then the two eldest died because they were executed by the Kempei Tai, which means Military Police Corps, the military police of Japanese Army. Bolodoy's farm could have been Tia Dami's Sweet Potato's kingdom if Tia Dami's was not executed by a Japanese platoon, and the tales about the sweetest potato spread around Iraya. Next slide, please po. The resolution, as Balodoy's brother crouched over the sweet potato grove, he saw their imprint, his ancestors. Suddenly, fireflies flew flashing the snippets of their history. Balodoy's brother thought if the ghost of Tia Dami's sweetness can finally be harvested through transcendence. So, the resolution po is transcendence because both Balodoy and Tia Dami manifested it but in different ways. The war is a lesson to the farmers. It taught the villagers in Iraya the importance of transcendence. Transcendence is the act of rising above something to a superior state, to using their creativity as a person and as farmers to rise and be beyond the limitations. And the next slide po will be presented by Karil Calagos.
Next slide please. For the theme of the story, that's the short story depicts the tragic events, war, rebellions, Koreans, and hunger happened during the Japanese occupation around 1942 to 1945 and the post-martial era, Corazon Blanco Aquino administration 1986 to 1990, and the issue of land distribution in the Philippines before the Anglo. This story was not just teaching about it's teach about the history of the Philippines that maybe not all of us know. So as already stated that in this story that 1987 was the year of war, but it is indeed the year of war because according to the history that in 1887 there were a lot of wars, rebellions, and protests that happened. Especially one of these is the Minjala massacre, or those farmers who walked and marched in the Mignola Street to talk to the current President Boris. And that was the time that there are 13 farmers that died during that. And the reason why 1987 was classified as the year of war because it is the post-martial law. And it is the time that we people, the Filipinos, then already have the chance or the freedom to speak up for themselves. And that was the time they already know that they can finally express themselves and what they want for the government. Also, they believe that Tony is different from Marcos, so they already think that with protests, with marching, they can finally achieve what they want, which is the land reform. But since that happened, they didn't expect that the government back then will use the military against the farmers, which is what happened in the Pichola massacre, wherein there were 13 farmers died, but there is no one died in that side of the government. Only some of them was injured. But then the government, the government, but the government said, but then the government said or inalabas that it was the farmers, it was the farmers, it was the farmers, it was the farmers who supposed that. But there is a 55-meter away. Farmers were 55 meters away from the government, and they did not. Hindi sila yung nauna during that time. They didn't show battles or what that the government did not. It was the government or the military who fired guns. But then the case was exacted because of some reasons that they are being affected by those situation. And the Japanese occupation in 1942 to 1945, it already stated that in Gascony, there is a happened in the harbor where the Vietnam landed sweet potatoes. And the reason behind that is because there is already really a hunger that happened in the Philippines. It happened in the later Philippines, where it is very a hunger because back then the stores are closed and the farmers leave. And that is the reason why there is a hunger happening. It is was not just stated in the story because it is really true and happened in the history. And the issue of the land distribution in the Philippines before Adrian Monteverde. So the land distribution issue already exists in the Spanish colonization as there is already an encomienda and hacienda system where in the Philippines, the Filipinos resources was under the ownership of the people who support them. And the Filipinos or the farmers back then are working as tenants, while those landowners give them protection and education. That was already happened back then, and it is just being passed now. But then, since Cabuyao became the president, the Hagaran Reform or Comprehensive Hagaran Reform Program happened. And it is the reason why we have also the 1987 Philippine Constitution. So there would be a peace in the Philippines because 1987 was the time of war. And to make sure that there would be a peace and order in the Philippines, they revised the Constitution. And we have now the 1987 Philippine Constitution. And more importantly, the Sweetest Potato by Marlene the Bobbies was about presidency. Presidency means that we should be beyond limitations and grace to dignify ourselves. Next slide, please. For the moral of the story presents the significant moral lessons needed to learn, which are farmers are heroes. Farmers may not be like doctors who save lives, they may not be the soldiers who protect our community, but they are indeed heroes because they are the one who planted the raw materials that we used to feed ourselves and that we use in the manufacturing industry. Also, be a go-getter than a danger. It also gives us an idea that dreaming of something, make your dreams come true, make your dreams become goal, and always be open for the opportunities. The next one is to acquire what you desire. You should surpass the target. As already stated in your study, that when you dignify yourself, you need to dream. And when you dream, you need to be ready to surpass the target and keep existence and skilled for the future. Because everything will never be easy, and your dream will be hidden to you, especially when you are not privileged. So for you to dignify yourself, for you to achieve success, for you to acquire what you are happy in yourself, you need to be ready to surpass the tires that is given to you. That's the only way for you to achieve the sweetest potato and focus on what task that we don't have. But then we need to focus on what blessings that we have and make use of it because we are God blessed in our own ways and use it to be creative in actions. That's all. And for
Hi po, good morning. This is still the group one from the last meet. I will be continuing the literary analysis of The Sweetest Potato by Marlene the Bobbies. At na po, sensory imagery, these are the sense of sight from the plots were overgrown with cogon and tug, the sleep or the prayer plant, which quickly folded when touched in the day. How inconsequential the mound looked, but after a year the vines would engulf it and the leaves would grow thicker, the roots fuller, sweet potatoes in his eyes, cheeks, belly, grown, even in his little toes. When this war ends, the sergeant will be garnished with grated young coconut and served with a cup of rice coffee. Legal documents were burnished before their noses by the mayor's private militia. Boloday planted sweet potatoes on the entire 3-meter border between our farm and the mayor's coffee grove. Next slide po. It is still the sense of sight. Then she packed her tapis wrap a shovel, her rosary beads, and a large machete. Fireflies had returned, flying close to my face. Suddenly, there was a fleeting spark everywhere I looked. Baloday's farm could have been Tia Dami's sweet potato kingdom, where she was found lying on a cushion of green and purple vines as if having a siesta. The bayonet wand was tiny and clean, a piggy bank's little incision, just enough space for a 10-centavo coin to pass through. Next slide po. And these are the sense of touch in the story. I wait the surgeon's knife blunted by digging. We love harvest most, the pregnant roots, the slippery struggle of an eel, the pulsing gills of the large damagan. I stood up, brushing the earth from my hands and knees. The earth felt cool in my hands, kogon, turog-turog, and clumps of beautifully rounded duma and precious loam cleared for the surgeon's grave. And last po, the sense of smell in the story. She always sat in the front pew, smelling of mothballs. Next slide po. And now we are here in the symbolisms. Sweet potato symbolize peace because in war it is always used to bring peace to warring tribes. It also symbolizes the rich cuisine and creativity of Filipinos along with rice coffee because that time sweet potatoes are very common to the farmers. It is easy to plant and fast to grow. The style or method of how they cook sweet potatoes and even these days sweet potatoes are still used in different dishes and different recipes. It also symbolizes poverty because in the story, sweet potatoes are the only food of the farmers or the only resources they have when they are struggling with hunger and poverty. Next is the sweetest potato. This is different from sweet potatoes because sweetest potato is the dreams of the farmers, which is the agrarian reform, having the land, owning the land they feel since their ancestors. Next is the deep grave. It shows the carelessness of those in power to the grievance of the poor who until death are still deaf. Um, it symbolizes the negligence of those in power that are deaf and doesn't understand or they are not listening to the poor people. Next is the deep grave. I no. Next is the surgeon's shallow grave. It represents the end of the farmer's suffering, showing that only the dead can hear them. Because sergeant military, which is used by people in the position to oppress the farmers. So since it's the grave of the sergeant, it will be the end for the farmer's suffering. Next is the surgeon's knife. So knife, it symbolizes violence, the government and military violence against the farmers. So the surgeon's knife was used for the burial of the surgeon. So the violence of them leads them to death. Next slide po. Next slide po. Yan. The mayor symbolizes the politicians that are cursing flying voters or the government. Next is the night or the darkness. It symbolizes the war and all the trials they faced as farmers. Fireflies symbolizes the flashing snippets and memories of the history of their past. It is also sometimes seen as magical, which shows the magic behind sweet potatoes because it is magical that with just planting sweet potatoes, you are indeed a hero. And it also symbolizes the magic that the farmer has. Their work is not easy, it is also difficult. So their ability is such a magic. They are being contented with what they have and make wise and great use of it. Um, it also symbolizes the simple life of the people living at Iraya because commonly in cities there's no fireflies in city. So it symbolizes the simple life of Iraya. And um, last symbolism of the fireflies is the hope seen by the farmers. Those little light from the fireflies in the darkness amidst the trials and amidst the war they face. That little light of the fireflies is the only hope of the farmers. And last po is the sweet potato grave. It is the similarities of planting sweet potatoes and burial of the dead. So, in addition lang po, Marlene the Bobbies not just wrote stories, but she wrote to deliver a message, and you can see it po in her works. When you read her stories, there's always a message that he wants to give to the readers. So, it makes her stories po distinct and recognizable by others. And yun po, that was our presentation of our literary analysis from the last meeting, Region 4A Calabarzon, Mr. Frank G. Rivera, the analysis of tekstuala ng pasasalamat from Region 4B Mimaropa, Mr. Jose Y. Dalisay Jr., the analysis of Maging Akin Ka Lang, and this po, Miss Merlinda Bobbies, the sweetest potato. We hope that you learned something po from us. We are the Group 1. Thank you so much for listening and thank you. Have a nice day po.